I hereby call the board meeting of the Prior Lake Savage Area School District to order, and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. All members are present with the exception of Todd. Do I have a motion for the approval of the agenda? So moved. By Lee, do I have a second?
Second.
By Ben. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? That passes 6-0. The agenda tonight is the approval of bid awards for bid package 10 for the partial high school foundation and structural package. And so Mr. Delwell with Mr. Jeff Martin from Nexus Solutions.
Good evening, Chair Wolf, School Board Dr. Stallo. We have in front of you a bid tabulation for bid pack number 10, partial high school foundation and structural package. This bid was last Tuesday.
Tuesday morning at 10 a.m.
And so I'd like to read the award letter to you and answer any questions you may have. So bids for Prior Lake Savage Area School partial foundation and structural package were received and publicly opened 10 a.m. Tuesday, September 18th at the district office. Nexus Solution recommends that ISD 719 that a motion be approved for partial high school foundation structural package be awarded to the apparent low bidders outlined below. Work scope 0330, cast in place concrete to Axel H. Ullman in the amount of $274,000. Work scope 0340, structural precast concrete to Wells Concrete in the amount of $295,450. Masonry work, work scope 420, Gressler Company Incorporated in the amount of $589,000. Work scope, structural steel erection, High Five Erectors Incorporated in the amount of $109,832. Work scope 3100, earthwork and site utilities to New Look Contracting in the amount of $429,433. Nexus also recommends to District 719 that motion be made to decline the bid for partial high school foundation structural package work scope 340, structural precast concrete from Molding Concrete. The submitted bid for and from both Molding Concrete did not include responsible contract verification compliance as required. Nexus recommends also that motion be made to delay the acceptance of bids for package work scope package 512, structural steel supply, until minor bid irregularities to be finalized. The total award of these bids is $1,697,715.
Okay, so do I have a motion for the acceptance of the bids and the conditions laid out in the letter in the agenda? By Ben, do I have a second?
Second.
By Stacy, are there any questions or comments? Oh, Mary, you have one?
Yes, where does this put this now? We had a budget for this bid packet. Where are we with regards to the budget without the contingency funds?
For the partial foundation package, we're approximately $270,000 under for that same scope of work.
And that's without the contingency
Yes,
funds
ma'am.
added in? Okay. And then my second question is as always, when I see a variation from a bid package, let's say from 705 to 549 or 740 by one bidder to 429, that's a huge variation. And it kind of makes me wonder, I mean, they're all over the board here. I'm glad we got good low bids, but it makes me wonder why there was such a discrepancy with the same project. Can you guys think of any reason?
No, I can't. I mean, we've talked to the bidders. Obviously, we focus most of our attention on the parent low bidder. making sure they have a complete scope of work, they understand schedule, timelines, et cetera. Every one of the low bidders has the proper scope of work. So, who can say, I mean, they could have math error, they could have had a higher profit margin, no telling why
Right.
that discrepancy would be so great.
No, we have a time period where they're allowed to submit questions, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Was there anything indicative in the questions that anyone asked that made you think that they didn't get it?
Nope,
Okay, and,
they're all very straightforward questions.
okay. They're all bonded, so regardless, they still have to do the work, and it is a not to exceed for 429. They can't come back to us afterwards and say,
Not
sorry,
unless
we didn't
there's-
get
Not
this.
unless there's additional scope.
Right, a documented change
Okay.
order or something like
Yeah.
that.
All right,
And I would like to talk just briefly about contract 512. The apparent low bidder did not submit a contractor verification form or affidavit. We're working with our lawyers. The low bidder is indicating that he's not required to submit that because he's submitting supplies only, or materials only, no work. And so we actually are working with our counsel to see if that is indeed correct.
is that what the scope called for, just materials only, no
Yes.
labor?
Yes,
Yep.
Okay, well,
so that's the irregularity.
okay.
Any other questions?
So,
Go ahead,
so
Stacy.
the plan then, if we get that figured out, is to come back with the next meeting and.
Yep.
And approve the final, okay.
I have a question on what Stacy
ahead.
just said, actually. So if we vote to approve this, we will come back then and reapprove that, or just accept the?
512's off right now. It's
Yeah,
not
512
So
is
so
off.
we're not voting on it?
Yeah.
Nope.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. I didn't hear
confirmed
what
that
you,
it would be
okay.
on the next one.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Before any contracts are issued, we will come back to the board
Okay.
for approval.
That was detailed
And it's
in the
removed
letter,
up on top in
Yeah.
the letter.
Yep.
what the motion was. So. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? That passes 6-0.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is to certify the preliminary property tax levy, presented tonight by Executive Director of Business Service, Ms. Sink.
Good evening. Tonight, we're going to talk about the preliminary levy certification. As you know, the board has to, by law, certify a preliminary levy to the county auditor by the end of September. And so we'll be reviewing this information in order for the district to make a recommendation for certification. We'll talk a little bit about the levy calendar, a little bit about some school funding, factors contributing to the change in the levy, the certification, and some graphical analysis. So for school districts, they're very different from counties or cities. They have the ability to levy, where the district, for the most part, we have to either, our levy is set by state formula, or, as happened last November, it has to be voter approved in order for us to have huge changes in our levy certification. The board has very little authorization for setting the levy outside of those parameters. So our formula is having our authorized total revenue minus our local property taxes, and the remainder of what the revenue, the majority of the revenue that we receive is state aid. Some factors that impact a change in our levy. There could be changes in our levies, state formulas change, and that happened a little bit this year where the legislature changed some of our formula for capital. And so there's a little bit more levy on capital levy and less state aid. There may be changes in sales ratio, which impact our adjusted net tax capacity. Those kinds of changes happen at times, and it happened not in the sales ratio, but last year they did have a reduction in our ag property. And so that is also driven by our legislators. Laws mandating code compliance, issues determined by district voters, voter-approved bond referendums, and excess levy referendums. And then some other local factors that affect us on our levy is pressures on the real estate market, abatements, property improvements not previously taxed. So as we're a growing district, it used to be taxed one way, and as they developed, those taxes increase. If you've ever lived in a new home, you know you have a year or two before you actually see the true taxes on your home. Change in individual assessed market value. So when your assessor, county assessor comes around and assesses your value of your home or business, and possible changes in classification, and we can talk about that if you have questions. So voter approved levy, what's included in our district certification are voter approved referendums, levies set by state formula, so you can see the list there, as well as levies authorized by the state based on local need. One of the things that's changed quite a bit this year is our adjusted net tax capacity increased by 13.2%, and our referendum market value increased by 8.6%. And why is this important? And is because as our district grows and that adjusted net tax capacity increases, that means there's more properties that our levies will be spread across. And so as that grows and if our levy stays stable, that means you should see a decrease in your school property levies because there's more properties to spread that total levy across. Referendum market value, as you know, that's only utilized when we pass a referendum. Bonds, building bonds are spread across referendum market value instead of adjusted net tax capacity. So you can see our referendum market value has increased 8.6% as well. We also have increased pupil units. Many of the formula calculations in our levy certification is based on pupil driven, and so as our district increases, we would see increases in our levy due to that population increase. And then again, I talked a little bit about the ag property tax credit. So you can see quite how our adjusted net tax capacity far exceeds any other time since 2008, so a 10-year growth pattern here that we've continued to see growth in this area. And same with our referendum market value analysis, again in 2017, which is the year that we have the most recent data on, because we're not quite finished with 2018 yet. You can see that we have large growth in that area as well. So enrollment history and trends, and we go back to 2005-06, a couple hundred students over 6,000, and over that these years we're now close to 9,000 students, and I anticipate by the time we start school a year from now we're probably exceeding that number. So here's our enrollment history and trends. I went back to 2014-15, and you can see our growth. We had some high growth years over the last 4 years, this year as well. And we're exceeding our budgeted number. I even looked today, we're at 8825 for our student population as of this morning. And so we're still quite exceeding our budgeted number. So we'll be talking about how to make adjustments in our budget for the current year based on those numbers. And then you can see what we had some projected numbers we talked about as part of our budget moving forward. So that's what we have out there as projected numbers into the future. And we showed strong growth, as you can see, through 2022-23. So this gets into the meat of our levy certification. This is the general fund. Our levy certification is split into our general fund, our community service fund, and debt service, and for a total levy. But you can see through this that there's ups and downs in each of these different areas, just depending on if there's a change in student population or if there could be a change in legislation. So you can see if you go down to line 4, the operating capital levy, there is an increase there simply because that is a legislative change. Same with the Q-Comp. There's not enough funds. I've talked about this before. There's not enough funds in the allocation by the legislature for Q-Comp, and so what happens is that gets transferred to our levy certification. Our equity levy went down slightly. I was surprised to see how little that went down, because as we passed our referendum and we have additional dollars coming into our district based on that operating referendum, I would have typically seen a decrease in that equity levy. However, there's several other districts that also increased theirs. So 2 years ago, If you talk about the equity levy, what that is it takes our 5% of the revenue that is received by referendum revenue that's received by metro school districts, and it takes the 95th percentile. And you're placed somewhere in that 95th, in those between 5 and 95. 2 years ago, our district was at the 75th percentile, which is 95 is the low end, 5% is the high end. So we were at the 75th percentile, we are now at the 65th percentile. So there's very little difference of where we've changed from 2 years ago until today. That means other school districts are also increasing their referendum revenue, and so that spread didn't change a lot for our district. So you can see that we've had some changes, small changes across the board in other areas. We are not levying this year for OPEB. We've met some obligations in our OPEB funding, and so I have not, because we've met our direct obligation for OPEB, and we can continue to gain interest revenue in there, I did not think that was necessary to continue to levy for that OPEB funding. So that's an increase of 2.21%. And as we move forward to Community Service Fund, that's a decrease of $112,000, so a negative. This is mainly due to our extended day disabled and how we're utilizing those funds, and we've reduced that levy quite a bit in that area. And then our debt service fund, every year we see this reduction in debt excess, the third row of that. The first one is our building bonds, and so you can see that's based on our schedule, and the district has to, by law, levy 105% of the schedule. And that is because if there's people that do not pay their taxes, that the district has the funds on hand to actually make the payment. So in case we get less money than we need, and by people not paying their taxes, that we actually have the money on hand. However, what happens is that fund builds in our fund balance. And so when it gets over the 105%, we can request if we choose, or the state will eventually take that and have a reduction in debt excess, which is the third line. This year, we're asking for a $900,000 reduction in debt excess, so that we're much closer to the 105% it's only 5% in our fund balance. Right now, we're closer to a little over 10%. So we're actually reducing our levy by that amount because of that excess in our fund balance. So overall, our district property tax levy will increase 1.64% over last year. I do have a schedule where you can see what our levy, I will go through this first. So this kind of goes back to our levy limitation analysis. It kind of goes back to saying how much local discretion the board really has. It's 12% of our total levy certification. The board has some control over setting that levy. The state determines 21% of our levy certification, and voter approved, as you can see, is the largest percent at 67%. That has increased by about 7% over last year. And then you can, of course, see our 10-year levy history. You can see the year that in 17-18, that increased because of the vote. Originally, the preliminary levy was 2.36%, and then the remainder is simply based because of the vote. And again, this year, we're back down in that 1.64%. I think without the vote, our average over the last 5 years would be somewhere around 2.6% increase in our levy. And if you took the 10 years, it'd be much lower than that. But you're seeing the growth, the high growth really does contribute to that. And if you look back to 2015 and 16, that's the year the legislature implemented long-term facility maintenance, and that was an increase in our levy certification as well. Any questions about the levy? There is a calendar that's attached to this just for your information. At the December board meeting, there'll be a request to certify the final levy. Tonight, the recommendation is to certify the maximum, And the reason that we request this is because when there's minor adjustments, the state can still make minor adjustments to our levy certification. And when I say minor, it may go to 1.64% or down to 1.63%. It'll be in that range. It hasn't really changed much over the past few years when we've done this, except if we have a vote.
All right, why don't I'll accept a motion for the approval of and certify the preliminary property tax levy as presented, the presentation
Second.
by Lee and seconded by Stacy. Are there any questions or comments for Julie?
I guess I have a
Go ahead,
question.
Stacy.
I just want to clarify now, the 1.64 is the maximum that we would take, correct?
When you certify the maximum, it does allow the state to make small minor
Right, like you
adjustments.
said, 1.6 or whatever,
Right.
but that's the maximum. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the actual taxpayers' taxes are gonna go up.
No, when you see the 13% increase in our adjusted net tax capacity and the 8% increase in our referendum market value, most likely the majority, unless of the homeowners will see a decrease in their school levy. I'm only talking school, I'm not talking about the city,
Right,
I'm
I'm
not
just
talking
talking
about the
school
county.
too,
But their
it's only-
school portion of theirs would most likely go down. The one exception is if they had a high increase in the valuation of their home.
So if they've done something to
If
their
they've
home
done some
and
updating to their
invested-
home, or their
Right.
valuation of their home has increased, they may see an increase there as well. But most likely, for the most of our, majority of the homeowners, they would see some sort of decrease.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I have a motion on the table. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? That passes 6-0. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.
Next, we adjourn. I'll take a motion for adjournment
So moved.
by Melissa. Do I have a second?
Second.
By Mary. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? That passes 6-0. Thank you. Meeting is adjourned.